Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Freak. Today we will be starting Part 3, Enemies Within Enemies, with Chapter 15, The Hall of the Founders. Let's all forsake the land of Wake, and break for the land of Nod, where we can try to touch the sky, or dance beneath the sod. A toll for the living, a toll for the lost, a toll for the wise ones who tally the cost. So let's escape due south of Wake, and make for the land of Nod. That's the nursery rhyme, whose origins are unknown. Hall of the Founders. The great library of Alexandria, considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, was the crowning glory of Ptolemy's reign. It was the intellectual center of the world when the world was still the center of the universe and all else revolved around it. Unfortunately, the Roman Empire believed their version of the world was the center of the universe and burned the library to the ground. It was considered one of the greatest losses of literature and wisdom that the world has ever known. Its rebuilding was the idea of the Thunderhead, and it mobilized thousands in a massive construction effort, providing them jobs and purpose for 50 years. When the great library was completed, it was as close a replica to the original as could be built, on the same spot where the first library stood. It was meant to be a reminder of what had been lost in the past, and a promise that knowledge would never be lost again now that the Thunderhead was there to protect it. Then upon the library's completion, it was seized by the Scythedom to house its collection of Scythe's journals, the leather-bound parchment volumes that all Scythes were required to keep every day of their lives. As the Scythedom was free to do whatever it pleased, the Thunderhead could not stop it. It had to remain content in the knowledge that the library had, at least, been rebuilt. As for its ultimate purpose, that could be left in the hands of humankind. Munira Atrushi, like most people in the world, had a job that was perfect in that it was completely ordinary. Like most everyone in the world, she didn't hate her job, nor did she love it. Her feelings lingered somewhere near the center. She worked part-time at the Great Library of Alexandria, 2 nights a week from midnight till 6 in the morning. Most of her days were spent in classes at the Cairo campus of the Arabian University, studying informational science. Of course, since all the world's information had long ago been digitized and cataloged by the Thunderhead, a degree in the informational science, like most other degrees, served no practical purpose. There would be a piece of paper framed on her wall, a permission slip to befriend others with similar functionless degrees. But she hoped having that piece of paper might give her enough prestige to convince the library to hire her as a full curator once she graduated. Because unlike the rest of the world's information, the journals of the Scythes were not cataloged by the Thunderhead. The journals were still subject to clumsy human hands. Anyone who wanted to research the 3.5 million volumes of journals collected since the first days of the Scythedom would have to come here. And they would come whenever they wanted, because the Great Library was open to the whole world 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Yet Munira found that people took advantage of its accessibility. During daytime hours, there was only a scattering of academics doing research. There were plenty of tourists, but they were more interested in the library's history and architecture. They had little interest in the volumes themselves except as backdrops for photos. People rarely showed up to the library at night. Usually it was just Munira and 2 members of the Blade Guard, whose presence was more decorative than purposeful. They stood silent at the entrance like living statues. During the day, they provided more photo ops for the tourists. While on her graveyard shift, she'd be lucky if 1 or 2 people showed up, and most of those who did know what they wanted, so they never even approached her at the information desk. It allowed Munira to spend her time either studying or reading the writings of the Scythes, which she found fascinating, to peer into the hearts and souls of the men and women charged with ending life, to know what they felt as they went about their gleanings. It was addictive, and reading the journals had become an obsession for her. With many thousands of volumes added to the collection each year, she never ran out of reading material, although some Scythes' writings were far more interesting than others. She had read all about the self-doubt of Supreme Blade Corpenicus before he self-gleaned, the profound regrets of Scythe Curie for her brash acts as a junior Scythe, and of course, the outright lies of Scythe Sherman. There was plenty to occupy her interest in the simple handwritten pages of the Scythe's journals. On an evening in early December, Munira was deep into the steamy exploits of the late Scythe Rand, who seemed to have devoted so much of her journaling to details of her various sexual conquests. Munira had just turned a page when she looked up to see a man approaching, his feet making no sound on the marble floor of the entry vestibule. He was dressed in drab grays, yet Munira sensed that he was a Scythe by the way he carried himself. Scythes did not walk like ordinary people. They moved with deliberate command, as if the air itself were required to part before them. But if he was the Scythe, then why would he be without his robe? "Good evening," he said. The deep peal of his voice came with American accent. He had gray hair and a well-trimmed beard that was on its way toward the gray as well, but his eyes seemed youthful, alert. Actually, it's morning, not evening, Munira said. 2:15 to be exact. She knew his face, but couldn't say from where. For a moment she had a flash of memory. Spotless white robe. No, not white. Ivory. She did not know all the sites, much less American sites, but she did know the ones with some level of international renown. She'd place him eventually. Welcome to the Great Library of Alexandria, she said. How can I help you? She avoided calling him Your Honor, as was customary when addressing a scythe, because he was clearly trying to be incognito. I'm seeking the early writings, he told her. Of which scythe? All of them. The early writings of all the scythes. He sighed, a bit miffed at not being understood. Yes, he was a scythe, all right. Only a scythe would seem both exasperated and impatient at the same time. All the early writings of all the first scythes, he explained, such as Prometheus, Sappho, Lenin. I know who the first scythes are, she said, irritated by his condensation. Munira wasn't usually so disagreeable, but she had been interrupted in a particularly interesting reading. Besides, her daytime classes left her little time to sleep, so she was tired. She forced a smile and resolved to make an effort to be more agreeable to this mystery man, because after all, if he was a scythe, he could choose to glean her if he found her too annoying. All the early journals are in the Hall of the Founders, she told him. I'll have to unlock it for you. Please follow me. She put it back up the back in 5 minutes sign at her station and led the man into the deep recesses of the library. Her footfalls echoed on the granite hall. Everything sounded louder in the silence of the night. A fluttering bat in the eaves above could sound like a dragon taking wing. Yet the man's feet made no sound as they walked. His stealth was unnerving. Some of the lights of the library, which came on ahead of them and extinguished behind them as they moved down the hall, flickering all the while mimicking torchlight. It was a clever effect, but tended to make shadows reach and retreat with unsettling intent. You do know that the popular writings of the Founders are all available on the site's public server, don't you? Munira asked the man. There are hundreds of selected readings. It's not the selected readings I wish to see, he told her. I'm interested in the ones that have been not selected. She looked over to him one more time, and finally it struck her who he was, and it struck her with such a force that she stumbled back with the shock of it all. It was only a small stumble, and she recovered quickly, but he saw it. He was, after all, a scythe, and scythes notice everything. Is something wrong? He asked. Not at all. It's the flickering of the light, she told him. It makes it hard to see in the uneven seams of the floor stones. Which was true, even though it was not the reason for her misstep. But if there was truth in what she said, perhaps he would not read her lie. Munira had acquired a nickname during her tenure here behind the library. The other clerks called her the Mortician behind her back, partly because of her funeral personality, but also because one of her jobs was to close out of the collections the scythes who had self-gleaned, who had been permanently entered by sinister means, as was happening more and more in the American regions. A year ago she had catalogued the complete collection of this scythe from the day he was ordained until the day he died. His journals were no longer housed in the collections of living scythes. They were now in the North Wing among the journals of all mid-American scythes who would no longer walk the earth. Yet here he was, Scythe Michael Faraday, walking right beside her. She had read quite a few of Scythe Faraday's journals. His thoughts and musings always affected her more than most. He was a man who felt things deeply. The news of his self-gleaning last year had saddened Munira, but had not surprised her. A conscience was a weighty thing, and his was difficult to bear. Although Munira had been in the presence of many scythes before, she had never felt as starstruck as she did now. Yet she couldn't let it show. She couldn't let on that she knew who he really was. Not until she had time to process it and figure out how on earth he could be here and why. Your name is Munira, he said, more a statement than a question. At first she thought he must have read her nameplate at the information desk, but something told her he knew her name long before he approached her tonight. Your name means luminous. I know what my name means, said Munira. So are you? He asked. Are you a luminary among dimmer stars? I'm just a humble servant of the library, she told him. They stepped out from the long central hallway out into a golden courtyard. On the far side was the wrought iron gates, the Hall of the Founders. Up above, the moon cast the topiary sculptures around them of deep shades of mauve, their shadows like dark pits that Munira was loath to tread on. Tell me about yourself, Munira, he said, in that quiet way scythes have, turning polite requests into orders one doesn't refuse. At that moment she realized that not only had she recognized him, but that he knew it. Did that put her in danger of being gleaned? Would he end her life to protect his own identity? From his readings he did not seem the type of scythe who would do such thing, but scythes were inscrutable. She felt cold now, even though the Arabian night was sultry and warm. I'm sure you ought to know anything I might tell you, Scythe Faraday. There, she had said it. Now all pretenses were gone. He smiled. I'm sorry not to have introduced myself earlier, he said, but my presence here is, shall we say, unorthodox. So then am I in the presence of a ghost? She asked. Are you going to disappear into a wall only to return night after night to haunt me with the same request? Perhaps, he said. We shall see. They arrived at the Hall of the Founders. She unlocked the gates and they stepped into a large room that Munira had always resembled a crypt. So much so that tourists often asked if the first scythes were buried here. They were not, but Munira often felt their presence in the room nonetheless. There were hundreds of volumes on the heavy limestone shelves, each book encased in a climate-controlled plexiglass case, an extravagance reserved only for the oldest volumes of the library. Scythe Faraday began to browse. Munira thought he would ask for his privacy and tell her to leave, but instead he said, "Linger here if you would. This place is too grand and austere to make a comfort of solitude." So she closed the gate, peering out to make sure there was no one there to see them. Then she helped him open the tricky, clear plastic case that held the volume he had retrieved from the shelf, and sat across from him on the stone table in the center of the chamber. He didn't offer an explanation to the obvious question that hung in the air between them, so she had to ask it. "How did you come to be here, Your Honor?" she asked. "By plane and by ferry," he answered with a smirk. "Tell me, Munira, why did you choose to work for the Scythedom after failing your apprenticeship?" She bristled. Was this his way of punishing her for not asking a question he did not want to answer? "I did not fail," she told him. "There was an only opening for a single Israbian scythe at the end of my apprenticeship, and there were 5 candidates. So one was chosen and 4 were not. Being among the unchosen is not the same as failure. Forgive me, I meant no insult or disrespect," he said. "I'm merely intrigued that the disappointment did not turn your heart against the Scythedom." "Intrigued but not surprised?" Scythe Faraday smiled. "Few things surprise me." Munira shrugged as if her unsuccessful apprenticeship 3 years before didn't matter. "I valued the Scythedom then, and I value it now," she told him. "I see," he said, carefully turning a page in the old journal. "And how loyal are you to the system that discarded you?" Munira clenched her jaw, not sure what answer he was fishing for, or, for that matter, what her true answer would be. "I have a job. I do it. I take pride in it," she said. "As well you should." He looked into her, through her. "May I share with you my assessment of Munira Atrushi?" he asked. "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice," he said, which was a half-truth if ever there was one. "Fine, share your assessment with me." He gently closed the old journal and gave her his full attention. "You hate the Scythedom as much as you love it," he told her. "Because of that, you wish to become indispensable to it. You hope that in time, you will become the world's greatest authority on the journals held in this library. It would give you the power over the Scythedom's entire history. That power would be your silent victory, because you would know that the Scythedom needs you more than you need it." Suddenly, Munira felt a slight loss of balance, as if the desert sands that had swallowed the cities of the pharaohs were shifting beneath her feet, ready to swallow her as well. How could he see so deeply into her? How could he put words to feelings she'd never even voiced to herself? He had read her completely in a way that freed her, yet ensnared her at the same time. "I see that I am right," he said simply. He gave her that same smile that was both warm and mischievous at once. "What do you want, Scythe Faraday?" And finally he told her, "I want to come here night after night until I find what I'm looking for in these old journals, and I want you to keep my identity a secret, warning me if anyone approaches me while I'm doing my research. I want you to promise me that the Scythedom will not be alerted to the fact that I am still alive. Can you do that for me, Munira?" "Will you tell me what you're looking for?" she asked. "I can't do that. If I did, you would be coerced into revealing it. I would not want to put you into that position." "Yet you would put me in the an unenviable position of keeping your presence a secret." "There's nothing unenviable about it," he said. "In fact, I suspect you are deeply honored to be entrusted with my secret." Again, he was right. "I don't like that you pretend to know me better than I know myself. But I do," he said simply. "I do because knowing people is part of a scythe's job." "Not all scythes," she pointed out. "There are those who shoot, slice, and poison without the respect that you've always shown for those you glean. All they know is ending life, never caring about the lives of those they end." For a moment, Faraday's well-controlled demeanor flashed, a spark of anger, but it was not anger at her. "Yes, the New Order scythes show a glaring disregard for the solemnity of their task. It's part of the reason why I've come here." Beyond that, he said no more. He just waited for her to reply. The silence stretched, but it was not an awkward silence. Instead, it was heavy with import. It felt momentous, so it needed time to unfold. It was not lost on her that there were 4 others who shared the position of the night clerk, other students who took the part-time job, which meant that this time, she was the one in 5 who was chosen. "I'll keep your secret," Munira told him. Then she left Scythe Faraday to do his research, feeling as if her life finally had a worthy purpose. And that is the end of Chapter 15, the beginning of Part 3. Thank you all for tuning in. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share the page with your friends. If you are a fan of gaming and video games in general, we do have a lot of gaming videos as well, rants, reviews. You can always check out the Twitches. Much love. Stay freaky.